What would you do if your own family gave you the worst room in the house and thought you wouldn't say a word? It was the kind of house where secrets grew like mold in the walls, thick, silent, and impossible to ignore once you knew where to look. A Victorian relic that had seen 3 generations of women fight their wars in whispers and shut doors. And when Mariah arrived at her family's home after 10 years away, they greeted her with brittle smiles, warm air kisses, and a room that smelled of mothballs and punishment. The attic. Not the spare guest bedroom overlooking the garden, not even the one with the faded pink wallpaper from her childhood. No, they gave her the attic slanted ceiling, 1 window, creaky floorboards, and a mattress so thin it practically begged her bones to complain. A room no one had entered in years, stuffed with old furniture and forgotten shame. But Mariah said nothing. She smiled, she unpacked, she made the bed. Because that's what you do when you've been cast as the difficult one since birth, when the narrative has already been written for you and you're expected to play the role without rewriting a single line. But you know what? That kind of silence breeds precision. You sit still long enough in a house like that, and you start to hear everything. The passive digs, the rewrites of history, the stories they tell about you as if you're not in the room. And when you're the one who left, the one who ran off with a scholarship and didn't look back, they make sure you remember that your place isn't down in the living room with the wine and candlelight. It's upstairs, with the dust in the boxes. Mariah needs space, her mother had told the others that first night. You know how sensitive she is. But what she really meant was, let's keep her out of the way before she makes this weekend about herself again. Because this weekend, this reunion was about family. And family meant the golden sister Lena, the one who stayed, the one who married well, the one who wore beige and made motherhood look like an Instagram ad. It's always the golden ones who shine the brightest when they have a shadow to reflect against. So Mariah played along. She smiled at Lena's stories about her perfect children, laughed when her uncle joked about how she'd finally come home to find a husband, and sipped her wine slowly, while her mother recounted in front of everyone how Mariah once cried over a dead bird at 6, and never quite toughened up after that. You ever been publicly dissected like a science experiment at your own family's table? It's a specific kind of violation, a death by tiny deliberate cuts. But Mariah didn't flinch, not once. Because when you've been branded as too much, too emotional, too sensitive, you learn how to sit in your own storm without blinking. What they didn't know was that she hadn't come home for forgiveness. She came with news. She came with truth. And it was the kind of truth that cracks through denial, like lightning through glass. So she waited, patient, watchful. Let them have their dinners and their laughter and their passive pity. Let them decorate their roles with pearls and smiles and wine glasses. Because Mariah knew in every family there's a moment when the script collapses, when the performance runs too long, and someone forgets their line. And when that moment came, Mariah would speak. But here's the part you should pay attention to, the part no one talks about in family dramas. It's not the loudest betrayal that cuts deepest. It's the quiet ones, the ones wrapped in politeness, the ones that offer you the smallest room in the house and expect you to be grateful. That's the betrayal that stays. And that's the betrayal that makes a woman dangerous. The morning of the 3rd day began like all the others with polite clinking of cutlery and a low hum of conversation over eggs someone pretended to enjoy. Mariah descended the stairs quietly, a ghost with perfect posture, and slid into her place at the far end of the table like she hadn't heard what Lena whispered to their mother the night before. She still dresses like she's auditioning for a life that doesn't want her. Mariah wore black, always black. Simple, sharp, defiant. No floral prints or soft pastels like the rest of them. She had long since traded approval for armor. Lena, in contrast, wore a peach blouse with delicate gold earrings that jingled just enough when she tilted her head in that charming way, the same head tilt that had won her student council their mother's approval and her husband's indulgence. "Sleep well?" Lena asked sweetly, not looking up from her toast. Mariah smiled slow. "Eventually, once I stopped counting mice in the walls." Their mother, Camille, gave a short, breathy laugh, the kind that sounded more like a cough. "Oh, that attic's just old. Nostalgic." Nostalgia. That was the word they clung to when they didn't want to admit something was decaying. You can learn a lot about a family by the room they give you. It's not about space, it's about value. Mariah knew she was being put back in the box they'd kept for her since childhood, the dramatic one. The problem. The one whose pain was always too loud, too inconvenient. She buttered her toast with surgical focus. "You know," she said lightly, I used to think that room was haunted. You were always so imaginative, Camille chimed, sipping her tea. Remember when you said Lena's dolls blinked at you in the dark? They did, Mariah replied flat. A beat. The table went quiet, but only for a second. The silence that followed was the type that makes people laugh too quickly afterward, needing to break it like thin ice. You ever notice how families perform denial like it's a sacred ritual? They bury what doesn't fit, smother what doesn't please. And Mariah, she had always been the reminder. The mirror none of them wanted to look into too long, because she remembered what they forgot. She remembered the night Lena locked her in that same attic as a child just for fun. Let's see if the ghost's like you, she'd giggled. She remembered how Camille had told her not to make a fuss when Uncle Paul's hand lingered a second too long at 12 years old. She remembered how everyone looked away when she cried at dinner, not because she was wrong, but because she ruined the mood. Some wounds don't scar the skin. They settle deeper in the bones of who you are. And Mariah had spent a decade unearthing those bones. Therapy, distance, silence, and then finally clarity. She looked up from her plate. Her voice when she spoke next was casual, too casual. Do you remember Aunt Lil's will? Camille blinked. Of course. Why? Because she left the house to me. The table stilled. Even the sun seemed to retreat behind a cloud outside. No, she left it to all of us, Camille said carefully. Joint inheritance. She updated it before she died. I have the paperwork. Lena's fork hit her plate. No one told you, Mariah asked, eyes innocent. She said she didn't trust any of you not to sell it. Silence, full silence now, the kind that trembles. Mariah leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee. So technically I could clear you all out if I wanted. Sell it, burn it down, lock the doors. Camille's voice was thin. You wouldn't. Mariah looked at her, really looked. At the perfectly coiled hair, the pearl earrings, the careful posture of a woman who never apologized. Would I? Here's the truth they never saw coming. The truth that made the attic room a chess move, not an insult. Sometimes the one you dismiss is the one holding the final card. And when she plays it, she doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't cry. She just watches everything fall quiet. The silence broke not with a scream, but with the brittle clatter of Camille's teaspoon falling to its saucer. You're lying, Lena snapped, her voice cracking through the room like glass under pressure. You always wanted attention even as a kid. You think we're just going to believe you own this house now? Mariah didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or defend herself, not yet. She simply slid a manila envelope across the table like it was a forgotten bill, unbothered and inevitable. Inside Aunt Lil's final testament, notarized and stamped. Mariah's name and only hers on the deed. Camille's hand trembled as she reached for it, but didn't open it. The room filled with the high-pitched hum of suppressed panic of unspoken calculations, running wild behind narrowed eyes. Lena leaned over, snatched it open, and read it as if searching for an escape clause. Her breath turned shallow halfway down the page. You're bluffing, Lena repeated, but quieter this time, a child's defiance inside a woman's voice. You see, every golden child thinks the role is permanent, like crowns passed down in bloodlines, untouchable by truth. But truth has a way of showing up uninvited, and sometimes it arrives wearing black. I tried to tell you, Mariah said softly. Aunt Lil saw what you all refused to. She watched. She listened. She remembered, just like I did. Her gaze swept across the table like a slow, sharp blade. Remember how you stopped visiting her when she got sick, Lena? Said she made you uncomfortable. And Mom, remember when you forgot her birthday 2 years in a row but still managed to send her an empty card last Christmas? No handwriting. No love. Camille looked away. Her pearls suddenly felt heavy. And Uncle Paul, Mariah added, turning her voice to ice. She remembered how you used to watch me swim when I was 13. She never let you in the house after that. No one dared breathe. You think your version of the past is safe because you told it louder, she said. But some of us carried the real version in silence for years. There it was, the rupture. The family's mask peeled off in broad daylight. No more holiday filters, no curated stories, just the rot beneath the wallpaper. But here's where it gets truly cruel. They still thought she wouldn't do anything. Because in this house, they only recognized power when it wore a man's voice or a martyr's face. Okay, Camille said, regaining some breath. You've made your point. You can have the master bedroom if that's what this is really about. Mariah tilted her head, lips parted in almost laughter. You still think this is about a room? It's always the same, isn't it? People think they can repair decades of dismissal with a single concession. A better seat at the table, a softer tone, a temporary truce. But Mariah wasn't bargaining. She wasn't even angry. She was clear. This isn't about revenge, she said. It's about balance. and boundaries. She stood slowly folding the envelope and tucking it into her coat pocket. Her calm unnerved them more than shouting ever could. "I won't throw you out. Not yet. I'm not like you." She walked to the window, looking out at the garden where she once buried a dead bird at 6 and wept until nightfall. No one came to find her. "I just want you to know that I could." The air thickened, the kind of pressure that sits on a person's chest long after the words are gone. "That attic room," she added without turning. "It was the best gift you could have given me. It reminded me of who I'm not, and who she would never be again." Let them sit with that. Let them chew on the taste of their own erasure. Because sometimes the only thing more powerful than shouting the truth is making them hear it in their own silence. Later that evening, the house tiptoed around itself. Camille retreated to her room early, claiming a migraine. Lena poured herself a second glass of wine she didn't sip. And Mariah, she sat in the attic door open, letting the quiet settle around her, like fog rolling in from memory. This was the room they gave her when they thought she had no power. The room meant to belittle, to remind her of her place. And now it was the room she chose to stay in, even after revealing she owned the entire house. Not out of spite, but clarity. Because nothing unsettles a family built on control more than the person they discarded choosing to stay calm. From the corner, a spider moved across the ceiling beam, weaving a web in soft arcs. Mariah watched it. She understood it, how it worked quietly, patiently, creating something sharp and strong from nothing but instinct. It never begged for space. It took it. You ever wonder why the ones you underestimate are the ones who end up holding the knife you never saw? Downstairs, Lena was pacing. She'd spent the last hour in the guest bathroom, calling her husband, speaking in clipped, desperate tones. "It's not fair," she hissed into the phone. "She's always had a way of turning things back on us. She's playing the victim again, but this time she came armed." Her husband's voice was muffled, distant, supportive but confused. Lena hated that even he didn't immediately side with her. She slammed her phone on the marble countertop and stared at her reflection. The girl who had always been praised for her beauty, her poise, her perfection now unraveling. It was the kind of fury that comes not from injustice but from entitlement interrupted. Upstairs, Mariah opened a box she hadn't touched in years. Letters, journals, the kind of things you keep when no one else is listening. She flipped through an old notebook and found a line she'd written the night she first moved out. "If I disappear, they'll sleep easier. If I stay gone, I lose myself. So I'll build a self they can't erase and return only when I don't need them." She had kept her promise. It wasn't the house she came back for. It wasn't even justice. It was peace. And peace, as it turns out, looks a lot like power. The next morning, Lena didn't come down for breakfast. Camille sat alone in the sunroom, eyes swollen. Mariah poured herself coffee and stepped outside to the porch, breathing in the cool air. And that's when Camille followed her. The screen door creaked behind her mother, always with that soft hesitation, the same way she used to hover outside Mariah's childhood room before walking away instead of entering. "You don't have to do this," Camille said, voice trembling under the weight of unspoken decades. "You made your point, but you've always been so sensitive." That word again, like a blade disguised as concern. Mariah turned to face her. "No, I've always been aware. You just called it sensitivity because you couldn't control it." Camille flinched as if the truth had hands. There was a long pause. "I didn't know how to raise you," Camille admitted suddenly. "You were different. Too honest. Too sharp. It scared me." And there it was. Not an apology, but an admission. Mariah exhaled. "That's the closest thing to the truth you've ever given me." Camille looked down at her hands. "What happens now?" Mariah looked out at the garden. "That depends on whether this house stays a stage or becomes a home." The sun broke through the clouds, then casting long shadows across the porch, stretching like truths finally spoken. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack. And in this family, cracks were miracles. That night, Mariah didn't sleep. Not because of the attic's creaks or the soft rustle of wind pushing against the old walls, but because silence after rupture is the loudest thing of all. She lay on the mattress, eyes open, watching the beam where the spider's web shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The air was heavy with unsaid things, not just from today, but from years past. From the kitchen table fights that were always swept under rugs. From the birthdays missed. From the moments when she'd walked into rooms and felt smaller just by being noticed. But now she didn't feel small. She felt seen. And that's what scared them most. Downstairs, Lena was packing. Fast, loud, erratic. Her suitcase groaned from the weight of the clothes she shoved inside, and the buttons on her blouse pulled tight as she moved, like even her skin was trying to escape. Her children asleep in the next room didn't stir. Her husband sat on the edge of the bed watching. He didn't stop her. "You're leaving because she finally stood up to you?" he asked quietly. Lena's jaw clenched. "I'm leaving because this place isn't safe for us anymore." "For us," he repeated, one brow raised. "Or for your version of yourself." She spun around. "Don't start with me." But the truth had already started. And once it starts, it doesn't stop just because you can't bear to look it in the face. He stood. "You know what I see? A woman who built her identity on being adored, and now she's furious someone else dared to stop playing audience." She slapped him. The sound cracked through the room. He didn't flinch. He just stared at her with something far worse than anger-disappointment. "You need help, Lena." She didn't respond, didn't need to. The silence said it all. In the attic, Mariah rose just after 4 a.m., unable to sleep, but calm. She moved to the window, opened it, and let the breeze in. The cool air carried the scent of soil, of memory, of something undone. That's when she heard it, the sound of Lena's suitcase thudding down the stairs. Camille met her daughter at the door, hair wrapped in a scarf robe tight around her like a shield. "You're just going to leave," Camille whispered, glancing nervously up the stairs. "What, you want me to stay and pretend she didn't hijack the entire family?" Lena hissed. "You always made excuses for her. And now look." Camille blinked, stunned. "You think I made excuses for Mariah?" But Lena was already out the door. Her husband followed in silence, carrying the suitcase. He didn't even say goodbye. The door clicked shut. Upstairs, Mariah stood quietly invisible in the shadows. She wasn't satisfied. This wasn't triumph. It was just inevitable. The truth always finds its way out, whether whispered or screamed. The next day, Camille approached her again, this time without pretense. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Quiet, real. Mariah didn't smile. She didn't rush into forgiveness like the movies tell you to. She just nodded. "I know," she said. They sat in the garden later, 2 women side by side, not mother and daughter, just women, imperfect, unraveling learning. Camille picked at the edge of her sleeve. "Do you think you'll keep the house?" Mariah looked around. The cracked stone path, the overgrown roses, the swing that no longer swung. "I think I'll restore it," she said, piece by piece. Camille nodded slowly. Maybe that's what we all need. Maybe, maybe not, but this much was clear. The attic wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a tower. A place she had once been locked in to be forgotten. Now transformed into the place she reclaimed herself. And what do you do when the people who once silenced you are forced to hear you even in their absence? You stop trying to explain. You let the echo do the work. The house was quiet again. But this time it wasn't silence built on avoidance. It was the kind that follows truth, heavy but clean like the air after a storm. Camille had retreated into herself not out of denial, but out of reckoning. She moved slower now, more deliberate. She didn't hover. She didn't offer uninvited apologies. She simply sat often in the same room as Mariah, as if her presence alone could mend something that years of excuses had broken. Mariah allowed it, not out of mercy but out of sovereignty. Because when you've lived your entire life gaslit into thinking your pain was exaggeration, your needs a burden, and your memories fabrications, validation doesn't need to come with flowers. Sometimes it's just someone finally shutting up long enough to let you breathe. She spent the next few days moving through the house like it belonged to her, because it did. She walked barefoot through the halls, pulled open long-sealed cabinets, sorted through Aunt Lil's letters in the study, and replaced the dead roses in the dining room with fresh lavender. She never once asked permission, and Camille never once objected. At night, Mariah lay awake in the attic, still her room by choice. She could have moved downstairs, taken the master suite with its velvet curtains and cedarwood closet. But no, the attic was hers now, in a way that no other room could be. The place they sent her to be forgotten had become the place she remembered who she was. You ever realize that? Sometimes we're buried so we'll grow not rot. Lena didn't return. She didn't call. A few texts came in over the following week, formal and frigid. Mariah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because the power dynamic had flipped. Not because Mariah sought revenge, but because she no longer required acknowledgement to exist. She had nothing to prove now. On the 10th morning, Camille surprised her. A knock on the attic door, soft, hesitant. Mariah opened it. Camille stood holding an old photo album, dusty leather-bound, worn around the edges. "I thought you might want this," she said. "It's the only one that has pictures of just you and Lil." Mariah took it cautious. The weight of it was more than just pages. It was history finally offered instead of hidden. "Thank you." Camille lingered. She always said you reminded her of herself, you know, the version of herself she wasn't allowed to be. Mariah looked up. Maybe that's why she left it to me. Camille nodded. Maybe. Then she said something to me once, right before she passed. She said, "The ones who feel too much are the ones who know what's real. That's why they scare us." Mariah felt her throat tighten. She hadn't cried in days, not even after revealing the will, not after Lena stormed out, not after Camille's first apology. But now something cracked. Because that was it, wasn't it? That's why they feared her. Why they belittled her. Why they sent her to the attic instead of the guest room. She saw through the performance. She always had. And when you see clearly in a house of illusions, you either get cast out or crowned. "I'm not here to punish anyone," Mariah said, voice thick. "I just want peace and truth in this house. From now on." Camille nodded again, slower this time. "Then that's what we'll have." They didn't hug. Not yet. But the door stayed open when Camille walked away. Mariah turned back to the photo album. She sat on the attic floor, legs crossed, flipping through pages of childhood she'd nearly erased. Aunt Lil's crooked smile, her own messy braids, a birthday cake shaped like a crescent moon. She smiled not because it was all beautiful, but because it was hers. Her memory, her life, her story, not filtered through someone else's comfort, not dulled for someone else's pride. She closed the album, stood and walked to the window one last time. The morning light spilled in, golden and defiant, warming the wooden floor. This was her house now. But more importantly, this was herself now. Unapologetic, unrevised. She didn't need applause. She needed space. And finally she had it. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.